This time on Boneyard Valves, we are continuing our mini-series here talking about cast production small block Chevy cylinder heads. Today we're going to be talking about the Swirl Port cylinder head, the 191 and the 193 casting codes. Coming up. Swirl Port heads were produced from 1987 to 1995. They were then replaced by the Vortec cylinder head, which we have one of those. That'll be another video coming up. Some things you need to know about these. There was two castings, as I mentioned before, a 193 and a 191, and there was differences between those two castings. The 193 casting, which is what this is, has a chamber size, which when I refer to the chamber size, I'm talking about the overall chamber here, was a 64cc chamber. The valve size for your intake was a 194, and your exhaust valve was a 1.5. Now your 191 castings were a little bit different than the 193s. The 191s had a 194 valve and the same size exhaust valve, the 1.5 exhaust valve. But the actual CC chamber was different. It was actually a much larger CC chamber. It went from a 64 to a 76 CC compared to the 93 like this one and the 191s. Some of the things that did change on these cylinder heads from their predecessors was the fact that this was the first cylinder head that was designed to have the center bolt valve cover adaptation style. Basically, they took a bolt right down the center of the valve cover instead of your traditional perimeter bolts on the sides. They were also machined flat. That surface area of the cylinder head, they were machined flat. The other thing that kind of really designated these cylinder heads to be a lot different than other ones was their actual port design. We'll come in here and we'll show you what I'm talking about. But basically these are known to be called the Swirl Port heads for a reason. The reason why they're called that is because if you actually were to look inside of the ports, you'd actually see what looks like a swirl design. Basically, the air and fuel velocity would come in through your intake manifold and then would shoot into your cylinder head here, and basically it would move in such a motion where it swirled into the valve. It wasn't a straight drop in like a lot of heads normally are. This design was good and bad in its own ways. It was good because it created a lot of low-end torque, which was perfect considering that these heads were majority on all of the Chevy pickups. So your 1500s, your 2500s, etc., etc. So basically that design was intended to create more low-end torque in a pickup truck application, which makes complete sense for what they are actually intended for. The only downside to that, though, is if it makes a bunch of low-end torque, it doesn't run very high into the RPM range. These things were usually only good for making torque up to 4,500 RPM, which, so obviously in some sort of a race, high compression, a good running car or anything like application like that, these heads are not going to perform as well as a lot of other options in the small block Chevy world. And honestly, these kind of heads in the small block Chevy world, when it comes to building engines, are kind of throwaways. My personal opinion on them, obviously they're not on the motor that they were on when I got the motor, so obviously I decided that there was a better set of heads out there, which is true. I have a set of Vortec heads on the motor that these cylinder heads were originally to. And I will say, there's not much you can do. I mean, yeah, you can port these, but the port design doesn't really allow for much extra flow there. You could do a few tricks. You could put bigger valves in it, but if these heads were just not meant to flow in a higher RPM range, so you're never going to truly make the horsepower that a lot of other heads can provide. But in my personal opinion, if you're looking to put together a more of a motor for a heavier duty truck, like I have a K20, I'll be honest with you, I have had thoughts to kind of keep the original cast head design about going through and doing these sets up. I probably won't. I'm just going to suck it up and go buy a pair of aluminum heads because that's what I'd rather build than invest money into these. But these, regardless of that, they're still a good usable head. I I don't know. They weren't really usable for the most part, and the one thing that I would say is I could see myself using these in another truck application if I was putting together another truck motor, specifically a truck motor that I wanted to just make globs of low end torque, where you put a nice little small cam in it and then set these heads on top and just really focus on trying to pick up those torque numbers in your low RPM range. Then you might actually have something here. So I personally like the heads. They did what they were designed to do. They weren't, you know, they weren't going to give you high flow numbers or anything like that, but they just did what they had to do. They provided low end torque on one of the GM truck applications. So, and that's pretty much that. So the overall overview of these: are these heads worth your time building at a machine shop? My argument would be yes and no. If you're looking for some sort of high performance, high end, make lots of horsepower, and honestly, if it's any small block Chevy that you're throwing into a street car, no, these are not the heads that I would argue that you'd want. Now, if you are putting together some sort of a motor that's going to go in some sort of square body Chevy, so a square body Chevy pickup, Blazer, even if it's something like more of a heavier duty or dump truck or a truck with a flatbed, you know what? Yeah, I'd actually run these. Like I said, they're not good for high horsepower, but they made good low end torque, and if you give them a little few upgrades here and there, like I said, you could throw bigger valves at them and little trinkets like that. Yeah, is that going to pick up a whole heck of a lot? No, it's not, but it'll help them breathe just a little bit more. And like I said, these heads did exactly what they were meant to do from the factory, and that's why I think that they're a half decent head. One other difference I did want to go over with you guys is that these heads, along from changing from the perimeter bolt style to your center bolt valve cover adaptation style, they also changed the bolts for the intake. What really sucks about these is that they kept their traditional bolts for the fronts and the backs, but in the middle 4 bolts they changed for your intake manifold. So in order to run a older style intake manifold, you either had to get one that was adapted and or actually machine a piece of that intake manifold out. Well, let me go grab one for you to show you what I'm talking about. So this is a Speedmaster dual plane high-rise intake, and what I'm talking about here is on the sides. If you look, do you see how those bolt holes are elongated on both sides? Basically, they did that so they could fit the Swirl Port heads over here. Now, you can get away if you wanted to, if you had a stock intake or whatever, you can actually probably drill these out or, you know, bore them out, make them a little bit bigger and make it fit. But that is one thing that you do definitely have to take notice if you want to try to use your traditional intake manifold within putting these in an application. So there's everything that you need to know about the Swirl Port heads with the casting numbers 193 and 191. So stay tuned in our next video, because our next video we're going to be taking a look at the small block Chevy Vortex cylinder head, which was the ones that would replace these. We'll be giving you all the details and the goodies on them. And then at the end of it all, we're going to be taking this Swirl Port head, our Vortex head, and our 624 casting head, and we're going to line them up all side by side, compare them all together, and pick out which one is the best cylinder head for you. With that being said, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Stay tuned, because like I said, we got a lot more information on these small block Chevy cylinder heads coming up. Catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.